Verse 19. This samadhi, when not followed by extreme non-attachment, becomes the cause of the re-manifestation of the gods and of those that become merged in nature. The gods in the Indian systems of philosophy represent certain high offices which are filled successively by various souls, but none of them is perfect. Verse 20. To others, this samadhi comes through faith, energy, memory, concentration, and discrimination of the real. These are they who do not want the position of gods or even that of rulers of cycles. They attain to liberation. Verses 21 through 24. Success is speedy for the extremely energetic. The success of yogis differs according as the means they adopt are mild, medium, or intense, or by devotion to Ishvara. Ishvara, the supreme ruler, is a special Purusha, or soul, untouched by misery, actions, their results, and desires. We must again remember that the Patanjali yoga philosophy is based upon the Samkhya philosophy. Only in the latter there is no place for God, while with the yogis God has a place. The yogis, however, do not mention many ideas about God, such as creating. God as the creator of the universe is not meant by the Ishvara of the yogis. According to the Vedas, Ishvara is the creator of the universe. Because it is harmonious, it must be the manifestation of one will. The yogis want to establish a God, but they arrive at him in a peculiar fashion of their own. They say, verse 25, "In him becomes infinite that all-knowingness which in others is only a germ." The mind must always travel between two extremes. You can think of limited space, but that very idea gives you also unlimited space. Close your eyes and think of a little space. At the same time that you perceive the little circle, you have a circle round it of unlimited dimensions. It's the same with time. Try to think of a second. You will have, with the same act of perception, to think of time which is unlimited. So with knowledge. Knowledge is only a germ in man, but you'll have to think of infinite knowledge around it, so that the very constitution of our mind shows us that there is unlimited knowledge, and the yogis call that unlimited knowledge God. Verse 26. He is the teacher of even the ancient teachers, being not limited by time. It is true that all knowledge is within ourselves, but this has to be called forth by another knowledge. Although the capacity to know is inside us, it must be called out, and that calling out of knowledge can only be done, a yogi maintains, through another knowledge. Dead, insentient matter never calls out knowledge. It is the action of knowledge that brings out knowledge. Knowing beings must be with us to call forth what is in us. So these teachers were always necessary. The world was never without them, and no knowledge can come without them. God is the teacher of all teachers, because these teachers, however great they may have been, gods or angels, were all bound and limited by time, while God is not. There are two peculiar deductions of the yogis. The first is that in thinking of the limited, the mind must think of the unlimited, and that if one part of that perception is true, so also must the other be, for the reason that their value as perceptions of the mind is equal. The very fact that man has a little knowledge shows that God has unlimited knowledge. If I'm to take one, why not the other? Reason forces me to take both or reject both. If I believe that there is a man with a little knowledge, I must also admit that there is someone behind him with unlimited knowledge. The second deduction is that no knowledge can come without a teacher. It is true, as the modern philosophers say, that there is something in man which evolves out of him. All knowledge is in man, but certain environments are necessary to call it out. We cannot find any knowledge without teachers. If there are men teachers, God teachers, or angel teachers, they are all limited. Who is the teacher before them? We are forced to admit, as a last conclusion, one teacher who is not limited by time, and that one teacher of infinite knowledge, without beginning or end, is called God. Verse 27. His manifesting word is Om. Every idea that you have in the mind has a counterpart in a word. The word and the thought are inseparable. The external part of one and the same thing is what we call word, and the internal part is what we call thought. No man can, by analysis, separate thought from word. The idea that language was created by men, certain men sitting together and deciding upon words, has been proved to be wrong. So long as man has existed, there have been words and language. What is the connection between an idea and a word? Although we see that there must always be a word with a thought, it is not necessary that the same thought requires the same word. The thought may be the same in 20 different countries, yet the language is different. We must have a word to express each thought, but these words need not necessarily have the same sound. Sounds will vary in different nations. Our commentator says, although the relation between thought and word is perfectly natural, yet it does not mean a rigid connection between one sound and one idea. These sounds vary, yet the relation between the sounds and the thoughts is a natural one. The connection between thoughts and sounds is good only if there be a real connection between the thing signified and the symbol. Until then, that symbol will never come into general use. A symbol is the manifester of the thing signified, and if the thing signified has already an existence, and if, by experience, we know that the symbol has expressed that thing many times, then we are sure that there is a real relation between them. Even if the things are not present, there will be thousands who will know them by their symbols. There must be a natural connection between the symbol and the thing signified. Then, when that symbol is pronounced, it recalls the thing signified. The commentator says, the manifesting word of God is Om. Why does he emphasize this word? There are hundreds of words for God. One thought is connected with 1,000 words. The idea God is connected with hundreds of words, and each one stands as a symbol for God. Very good. But there must be a generalization among all these words, some substratum, some common ground of all these symbols, and that which is the common symbol will be the best and will really represent them all. In making a sound, we use the larynx and the palate as a sounding board. Is there any material sound of which all other sounds must be manifestations, one which is the most natural sound? Om is such a sound, the basis of all sounds. The first letter, A, is the root sound, the key, pronounced without touching any part of the tongue or palate. M represents the last sound in the series being produced by the closed lips, and the U rolls from the very root to the end of the sounding board of the mouth. Thus, Om represents the whole phenomena of sound producing. As such, it must be the natural symbol, the matrix of all the various sounds. It denotes the whole range and possibility of all the words that can be made. Apart from these speculations, we see that around this word Om are centered all the different religious ideas in India. All the various religious ideas of the Vedas have gathered themselves round this word Om. What is that to do with America and England or any other country? Simply this, that the word has been retained at every stage of religious growth in India, and it has been manipulated to mean all the various ideas about God. Monists, dualists, monodualists, separatists, and even atheists take up this Om. Om has become the one symbol for the religious aspiration of the vast majority of human beings. Take, for instance, the English word God. It covers only a limited function, and if you go beyond it, you have to add adjectives to make it personal, or impersonal, or absolute God. So with the words for God in every other language, their signification is very small. This word, Om, however, has around it all the various significances. As such, it should be accepted by everyone. Verse 28. The repetition of this Om and meditating on its meaning is the way. Why should there be repetition? We have not forgotten the theory of samskaras, that the sum total of impressions lives in the mind. They become more and more latent but remain there, and as soon as they get the right stimulus, they come out. Molecular vibration never ceases. When this universe is destroyed, all the massive vibrations disappear. The sun, moon, stars, and earth melt down, but the vibrations remain in the atoms. Each atom performs the same function as the big worlds do. So even when the vibrations of the chitta, or mind stuff, subside, its molecular vibrations go on, and when they get the impulse, come out again. We can now understand what is meant by repetition. It is the greatest stimulus that can be given to the spiritual samskaras. One moment of company with the holy makes a ship to cross this ocean of life. Such is the power of association. So this repetition of Om and thinking of its meaning is keeping good company in your own mind. Study and then meditate on what you have studied. Thus, light will come to you. The self will become manifest. But one must think of Om and of its meaning too. Avoid evil company, because the scars of old wounds are in you, and evil company is just the thing that is necessary to call them out. In the same way, we are told that good company will call out the good impressions that are in us, but which have become latent. There is nothing holier in the world than to keep good company, because the good impressions will then tend to come to the surface. Verse 29. From that is gained the knowledge of introspection and the destruction of obstacles. The first manifestation of the repetition and thinking of Om is that the introspective power will manifest more and more, and all the mental and physical obstacles will begin to vanish. What are the obstacles to the yogi? Verse 30. Disease, mental laziness, doubt, lack of enthusiasm, lethargy, clinging to sense enjoyments, false perception, non-attaining concentration, and falling away from the state when obtained are the obstructing distractions. Disease. This body is the boat which will carry us to the other shore of the ocean of life. It must be taken care of. Unhealthy persons cannot be yogis. Mental laziness makes us lose all lively interest in the subject, without which there will neither be the will nor the energy to practice. Doubts will arise in the mind about the truth of the science, however strong one's intellectual conviction may be, until certain peculiar psychic experiences come, as hearing or seeing at a distance, etc. These glimpses strengthen the mind and make the student persevere. Falling away from the state when obtained. Some days or weeks, when you are practicing, the mind will be calm and easily concentrated, and you will find yourself progressing fast. All of a sudden, the progress will stop one day, and you'll find yourself, as it were, stranded. Persevere. All progress proceeds by such rise and fall. Verse 31. Grief, mental distress, tremor of the body, and irregular breathing accompany non-retention of concentration. Concentration will bring perfect repose to mind and body every time it is practiced. When the practice has been misdirected or not enough controlled, these disturbances come. Repetition of Om and self-surrender to the Lord will strengthen the mind and bring fresh energy. The nervous shakings will come to almost everyone. Do not mind them at all, but keep on practicing. Practice will cure them and make the seat firm. Verse 32. To remedy this, the practice of one subject should be made. Making the mind take the form of one object for some time will destroy these obstacles. This is general advice. In the following aphorisms, it will be expanded and particularized. As one practice cannot suit everyone, various methods will be advanced, and everyone, by actual experience, will find out that which helps him most. Verse 33. Friendship, mercy, gladness, and indifference, being thought of in regard to subjects happy, unhappy, good, and evil respectively, pacify the citta. We must have these four sorts of ideas. We must have friendship for all. We must be merciful towards those that are in misery. When people are happy, we ought to be happy, and to the wicked we must be indifferent. So with all subjects that come before us. If the subject is a good one, we shall feel friendly towards it. If the subject of thought is one that's miserable, we must be merciful towards it. If it is good, we must be glad. If it is evil, we must be indifferent. These attitudes of the mind towards the different subjects that come before it will make the mind peaceful. Most of our difficulties in our daily lives come from being unable to hold our minds in this way. For instance, if a man does evil to us, instantly we want to react evil, and every reaction of evil shows that we are not able to hold the citta or mind stuff down. It comes out in waves towards the object, and we lose our power. Every reaction in the form of hatred or evil is so much loss to the mind, and every evil thought or deed of hatred or any thought of reaction, if it is controlled, will be laid in our favor. It is not that we lose by thus restraining ourselves. We are gaining infinitely more than we suspect. Each time we suppress hatred or a feeling of anger, it is so much good energy stored up in our favor. that piece of energy will be converted into the higher powers. Verse 34. By throwing out and restraining the breath. The word used is prana. Prana is not exactly breath. It is the name for the energy that is in the universe. Whatever you see in the universe, whatever moves or works or has life, is a manifestation of this prana. The sum total of the energy displayed in the universe is called prana. This prana, before a cycle begins, remains in an almost motionless state. And when the cycle begins, this prana begins to manifest itself. It is this prana that is manifested as motion, as the nervous motion in human beings or animals, and the same prana is manifesting as thought, and so on. The whole universe is a combination of prana and akasha. So is the human body. Out of akasha, you get the different materials that you feel and see, and out of prana, all the various forces. Now this throwing out and restraining the prana is what is called pranayama. Patanjali, the father of yoga philosophy, does not give very many particular directions about pranayama, but later on, other yogis found out various things about this pranayama and made of it a great science. With Patanjali, it is one of the many ways, but he does not lay much stress on it. He means that you simply throw the air out and draw it in and hold it for some time. That is all. And by that, the mind will become a little calmer. But later on, you will find that out of this is evolved a particular science called pranayama. We shall hear a little of what these later yogis have to say. Some of this I've told you before, but a little repetition will serve to fix it in your minds. First, you must remember that this prana is not the breath, but that which causes the motion of the breath, that which is the vitality of the breath. That is the prana. Again, the word prana is used for all the senses. They are all called pranas. The mind is called prana, and so we see that prana is a force. And yet, we cannot call it force because force is only the manifestation of it. It is that which manifests itself as force and everything else in the way of motion. The chitta, the mind stuff, is the engine which draws in the prana from the surroundings and manufactures out of prana the various vital forces, those that keep the body in preservation, and thought, will, and all other powers. By the above-mentioned process of breathing, we can control all the various motions in the body and the various nerve currents that are running through the body. First, we begin to recognize them, and then we slowly get control over them. Now, these later yogis consider that there are three main currents of this prana in the human body. One they call ira, another pingala, and the third sushumna. Pingala, according to them, is on the right side of the spinal column, and the ira on the left, and in the middle of the spinal column is the sushumna, an empty channel. Ira and pingala, according to them, are the currents working in every man, and through these currents we are performing all the functions of life. Sushumna is present in all as a possibility, but it works only in the yogi. You must remember that yoga changes the body. As you go on practicing, your body changes. It is not the same body that you had before the practice. That is very rational and can be explained because every new thought that we have must make, as it were, a new channel through the brain, and that explains the tremendous conservatism of human nature. Human nature likes to run through the ruts that are already there, because it's easy. If we think, just for example's sake, that the mind is like a needle and the brain substance a soft lump before it, then each thought that we have makes a street, as it were, in the brain, and this street would close up but for the grey matter which comes and makes a lining to keep it separate. If there were no grey matter, there would be no memory, because memory means going over these old streets, retracing a thought, as it were. Now perhaps you have marked that when one talks on subjects in which one takes a few ideas that are familiar to everyone and combines and recombines them, it is easy to follow because these channels are present in everyone's brain and it is only necessary to refer to them. But whenever a new subject comes, new channels have to be made, so it is not understood readily. And that is why the brain, it is the brain and not the people themselves, refuses unconsciously to be acted upon by new ideas. It resists. The prana is trying to make new channels, and the brain will not allow it. This is the secret of conservatism. The fewer channels there have been in the brain, and the less the needle of the prana has made these passages, the more conservative will be the brain, the more it will struggle against new thoughts. The more thoughtful the man, the more complicated will be the streets in his brain, and the more easily he will take to new ideas and understand them. So, with every fresh idea, we make a new impression in the brain, cut new channels through the brain stuff, and that is why we find that in the practice of yoga, it being an entirely new set of thoughts and motives, there is so much physical resistance at first. That is why we find that the part of religion which deals with the world side of nature is so widely accepted, while the other part, the philosophy or the psychology, which deals with the inner nature of man, is so frequently neglected. We must remember the definition of this world of ours. It is only the infinite existence projected into the plane of consciousness. A little of the infinite is projected into consciousness, and that we call our world. So there is an infinite beyond, and religion has to deal with both, with the little lump we call our world, and with the infinite beyond. Any religion which deals with only one of these two will be defective. It must deal with both. The part of religion which deals with the part of the infinite which has come into the plane of consciousness got itself caught, as it were, in the plane of consciousness, in the cage of time, space, and causation, is quite familiar to us, because we are in that already, and ideas about this world have been with us almost from time immemorial. The part of religion which deals with the infinite beyond comes entirely new to us, and getting ideas about it produces new channels in the brain, disturbing the whole system, and that is why you find in the practice of yoga, ordinary people are at first turned out of their grooves. In order to lessen these disturbances as much as possible, all these methods are devised by Patanjali that we may practice any one of them best suited to us. Verse 35. Those forms of concentration that bring extraordinary sense perceptions cause perseverance of the mind. This naturally comes with dharana, or concentration. The yogis say, if the mind becomes concentrated on the tip of the nose, one begins to smell, after a few days, wonderful perfumes. If it becomes concentrated to the root of the tongue, one begins to hear sounds. If, on the tip of the tongue, one begins to taste wonderful flavors. If, on the middle of the tongue, one feels as if one were coming in contact with something. If one concentrates one's mind on the palate, one begins to see peculiar things. If a man whose mind is disturbed wants to take up some of these practices of yoga, yet doubts the truth of them, he will have his doubts set at rest when, after a little practice, these things come to him, and he will persevere. Verse 36. Or by the meditation on the effulgent light, which is beyond all sorrow. This is another sort of concentration. Think of the lotus of the heart, with petals downwards, and running through it the sushumna, or middle channel. Take in the breath, and while throwing the breath out, imagine that the lotus is turned with the petals upwards, and inside that lotus is an effulgent light. Meditate on that. Verse 37. Or by meditation on the heart that has given up all attachment to sense objects. Take some holy person, some great person whom you revere, some saint whom you know to be perfectly non-attached, and think of his heart. That heart has become non-attached, and meditate on that heart. It will calm the mind. If you cannot do that, there is the next way. Verse 38. Or by meditating on the knowledge that comes in sleep. Sometimes a man dreams that he has seen angels coming to him and talking to him, that he is in an ecstatic condition, that he has heard music floating through the air. He is in a blissful condition in that dream, and when he wakes, it makes a deep impression on him. Think of that dream as real and meditate upon it. If you cannot do that, meditate on any holy thing that pleases you. Verse 39. Or by the meditation on anything that appeals to one as good. This does not mean any wicked subject, but anything good that you like, any place that you like best, any scenery that you like best, any idea that you like best, anything that will concentrate the mind. Verse 40. The yogi's mind, thus meditating, becomes unobstructed from the atomic to the infinite. The mind, by this practice, easily contemplates the most minute as well as the biggest thing. Thus, the mind waves become fainter. Verse 41. The yogi, whose vrittis have thus become controlled, sees in the receiver, the receiving, and the received, concentratedness and sameness, like a crystal before differently colored objects. What results from this constant meditation? We must first remember how in a previous aphorism Patanjali went into the various states of meditation, how the first would be the gross, the second the fine, and from them the advance was to still finer objects. The result of these meditations is that we can meditate as easily on the fine as on the gross objects. Here, the yogi sees the three things, the receiver, the received, and the receiving instrument, corresponding to the soul, the external objects, and the mind. There are three objects of meditation given us. First, the gross things, as bodies or material objects. Second, fine things, as the mind, the chitta. And third, the Purusha qualified, not the Purusha itself, but the egoism. By practice, the yogi gets established in all these meditations. Whenever he meditates, he can keep out all other thoughts. He becomes identified with that on which he meditates. When he meditates, he is like a piece of crystal. Before flowers, the crystal becomes almost identified with the flowers. If the flower is red, the crystal looks red. If the flower is blue, the crystal looks blue. Verse 42. Sound, meaning, and resulting knowledge being mixed up is called samadhi with question. Sound here means vibration, meaning the nerve currents which conduct it. And knowledge means reaction. All the various meditations we have had so far, Patanjali calls sa-vitarka, meditation with question. Later on, he gives us higher and higher dhyanas. In these that are called with question, we keep the duality of subject and object, which results from the mixture of word, meaning, and knowledge. There is first the external vibration, the word. This, carried inward by the sense currents, is the meaning. After that, there comes a reactionary wave in the citta, which is knowledge. But the mixture of these three makes up what we call knowledge. In all the meditations up to this, we get this mixture as objects of meditation. The next samadhi is higher. Verse 43. The samadhi, called without question, comes when the memory is purified or devoid of qualities, expressing only the meaning of the meditated object. It is by the practice of meditation of these three that we come to the state where these three do not mix. We can get rid of them. We will first try to understand what these three are. Here is the citta, or mind stuff. You will always remember the simile of the mind stuff to a lake, and the vibration, the word, the sound, like a pulsation coming over it. You have that calm lake in you, and I pronounce a word, cow. As soon as it enters through your ears, there is a wave produced in your citta along with it. So that wave represents the idea of the cow, the form or the meaning as we call it. The apparent cow that you know is really the wave in the mind stuff that comes as a reaction to the internal and external sound vibrations. With the sound, the wave dies away. It can never exist without a word. You may ask how it is when we only think of the cow and do not hear a sound. You make that sound yourself. You are saying cow faintly in your mind, and with that comes a wave. There cannot be any wave without this impulse of sound. And when it is not from outside, it is from inside. And when the sound dies, the wave dies. What remains? The result of the reaction, and that is knowledge. These three are so closely combined in our mind that we cannot separate them. When the sound comes, the senses vibrate, and the wave rises in reaction. They follow so closely upon one another that there is no discerning one from the other. When this meditation has been practiced for a long time, memory, the receptacle of all impressions, becomes purified, and we are able clearly to distinguish them from one another. This is called nirvitarka, concentration without question. Verse 44. By this process, the concentrations with discrimination and without discrimination, whose objects are finer, are also explained. In the two previous verses are explained the samadhi with discrimination and the samadhi without discrimination, in which objects are finer. Verse 45. The finer objects end with the pradhana. The gross objects are only the elements and everything manufactured out of them. The fine objects begin with the tanmatras, or fine particles. The category of fine objects includes the organs, the mind, egoism, and the mind stuff, which is the cause of manifestation. It also includes prakriti, or nature, and the unmanifest state called pradhana, in which the materials of sattva, rajas, and tamas are in equilibrium. The Purusha alone is excepted from this definition. Verse 46. These concentrations are with seed. These do not destroy the seeds of past actions, and thus cannot give liberation. But what they bring to the yogi is stated in the following aphorism. Verse 47. The concentration without discrimination being purified, the chitta becomes firmly fixed. Verse 48. The knowledge in that is called filled with truth. The next aphorism will explain this. Verse 49. The knowledge that is gained from testimony and inference is about common objects. That from the samadhi just mentioned is of a much higher order, being able to penetrate where inference and testimony cannot go. The idea is that we have to get our knowledge of ordinary objects by direct perception and by inference therefrom, and from testimony of people who are competent. By people who are competent, the yogis always mean the rishis, or the seers of the thoughts recorded in the scriptures, the Vedas. According to them, the only proof of the scriptures is that they were the testimony of competent persons. Yet, they say the scriptures cannot take us to realization. We can read all the Vedas and yet will not realize anything. But when we practice their teachings, then we attain to that state which realizes what the scriptures say, which penetrates where neither reason nor perception nor inference can go, and where the testimony of others cannot avail. This is what is meant by the aphorism. Realization is real religion. All the rest is only preparation. Hearing lectures, or reading books, or reasoning is merely preparing the ground. It is not religion. Intellectual assent and intellectual dissent are not religion. The central idea of the yogis is that just as we come in direct contact with objects of the senses, so religion, even, can be directly perceived in a far more intense sense. The truths of religion, as God and soul, cannot be perceived by the external senses. I cannot see God with my eyes, nor can I touch him with my hands, and we also know that neither can we reason beyond the senses. Reason leaves us at a point quite indecisive. We may reason all our lives, as the world has been doing for thousands of years, and the result is that we find we are incompetent to prove or disprove the facts of religion. What we perceive directly we take as the basis, and upon that basis we reason. So it is obvious that reasoning has to run within these bounds of perception. It can never go beyond. The whole scope of realization, therefore, is beyond sense perception. The yogis say that man can go beyond his direct sense perception and beyond his reason also. Man has in him the faculty, the power of transcending his intellect even, a power which is in every being, every creature. By the practice of yoga, that power is aroused, and then man transcends the ordinary limits of reason and directly perceives things which are beyond all reason. Verse 50. The resulting impression from this samadhi obstructs all other impressions. We have seen in the foregoing aphorism that the only way of attaining to that superconsciousness is by concentration, and we have also seen that what hindered the mind from concentration are the past samskaras, or impressions. All of you have observed that when you are trying to concentrate your mind, your thoughts wander. When you are trying to think of God, that is the very time these samskaras appear. At other times, they are not so active, but when you want them not, they are sure to be there, trying their best to crowd in your mind. Why should that be so? Why should they be much more potent at the time of concentration? It is because you are repressing them, and they react with all their force. At other times, they do not react. How countless these old past impressions must be, all lodged somewhere in the chitta, ready, waiting like tigers to jump up. These have to be suppressed, that the one idea which we want may arise, to the exclusion of the others. Instead, they are all struggling to come up at the same time. These are the various powers of the samskaras in hindering concentration of the mind. So this samadhi, which has just been given, is the best to be practiced on account of its power of suppressing the samskaras.